Hello and welcome to Mostly Vintage Cameras. This is a Pentax PC35AF and it was one of a number of automatic 35mm cameras from the early 1980s. This particular camera holds a soft spot in my heart just because I started in a camera shop in 1983 and this was very much for sale at that time. So it was one of the first cameras that I would have been selling to consumers back, as they say, in the day. It's actually a really terrific camera, but wasn't at the time all that popular. And the main reason being this little windy on wheel here. So many other automatic 35mm cameras would wind the film on automatically, and if you're going to have an automatic camera, well, you really want it to be automatic, don't you? This all starts, of course, with the Canon Sure Shot. Some people would reasonably say it started with the Konica C35, but Canon always claimed the crown because of this active autofocus system, which they proudly put the little logo on the camera. So this was very much fully automatic, an active infrared autofocus system, and when Canon did well with this, lots of other manufacturers jumped in on the, let's call it the bandwagon. And we've got the Minolta AFS. Even Fujifilm did a pretty capable DL200. Nikon were fairly late to the show, so to speak, and didn't launch their now very popular L35AF until '86. So the little Pentax in '82 was a little bit of a trailblazer, albeit following behind the success of the Canon Sure Shot, and just a little unfortunate that the manual wind-on meant that consumers weren't as keen on it. By sort of 82, 83, Canon had moved on to the Sure Shot Mark II, which was much more compact and even more integrated with a motorised lens cover. But that's a little bit of history. Let's put some batteries in and see what we actually get in this camera. I've got to say this one's a little bit broken in that the lens closure is a little stiff. So the batteries sit underneath this cover, and I'm sure many people will be pleased to know it takes 2 AAA alkaline cells. Not my favourite, but if you like cameras that run on alkaline cells, then it's a lucky day. Now it has to be said, because it's manual wind on, the drain on the battery is a little less than in obviously motorised wind on cameras. It's only really the flash that has a significant amount of drain. So, put the batteries in. Let's take a look at some of the controls. It's pretty standard stuff. There's a little red catch here on the side that pops the lens cover open. And as I say, on this one, it gets a little bit jammed on, which is unfortunate. On the top plate, not too much to see. We've got a big red shutter button. No doubting what that does. And if you're used to automatic winding cameras, every time you take a picture you pause and wait for the of the winding. But with this one, of course. Now that does make it a little bit quieter. The focus is pretty loud, as is the shutter. But compared to some of its contemporaries, because it's manual winding, it is a lot quieter and a little bit more discreet. Unusually, there's a little backlight compensation button. So at this time there was maybe a little uncertainty what consumers wanted from their automatic cameras, whether they were photographers looking for a small walk around camera, or if they were just regular people looking for a high down holiday camera that weren't interested in photography. So little features like a backlight compensation button. If you've got a lot of sky, for example, in the scene, the landscape's going to be in silhouette, so you can just press that as you take the picture and away it goes. The focusing can be pre-focused. There's a circle in the middle of the viewfinder. You point that at what you want sharp, you press the button halfway down. Can you hear that? That locks the focus, recompose and take the picture. So that's great for off-center subjects. Also on the top plate is a self timer. One slightly irritating thing about this camera is it's not self-cancelling, so once it's taken its 10 seconds, and I think we'll see there's a flashy light on the front there, and a beeper. You wind on and go to take the next picture, only to find that you've forgotten to turn the self timer off. That can be a little bit irksome, but a fairly minor irritation in truth. Moving to the base plate, this is predating DX coding in actual fact. So the film speed you set yourself with this slider between 25 and 400. So not a massive range of options, but this was before Kodak VR1000. A lot of people would have been shooting films like Kodachrome 25, 64, and then the random, the usual colour print type film speeds 1, 2, 400. So perfectly adequate for the day, but if you're looking at one of these in 2023, just bear in mind that you're not going to be shooting Delta 3200 in this, or Portrait 800, unless you want to overexpose it a little bit. Also on the bottom we've looked at wind on. To rewind the film, there's the classic rewind release button. The rewind crank simply folds out, all metal construction. The only thing I would say is a little bit small, so that is a little bit fiddly when you come to take the film out, which is a shame, but the camera itself is very small. Even if we compare it to the Minolta of a similar period, the Minolta is obviously quite a lot bigger. So do you want automatic winding or a smaller camera? Moving on, film loading. Let's get this right. Actually, there's one last thing on the base plate here. There is a built-in flash unit. Now, as some people watching this video might know, I'm quite a fan of Minox, and everybody says, oh, they're so small. They're so small until you put a flash unit on them. These cameras of this vintage, struggling a little bit there, have a built-in flash. Not a powerful one perhaps, but it is built in. So you get a couple of indications when to use that. If it's too dark, you hear that beeper, and there are videos online showing you how to take your camera apart and cut out the piezoelectric emitter so it doesn't beep. Personally, I think it's a vintage part of a vintage product, so I'm happy to have it there. And you get a little red light in the viewfinder that goes alongside that. I don't know if you can see it terribly well, probably not. You get a little low light warning light in the viewfinder. When you do turn the flash unit on, there's a flash ready or flash charge light next to the viewfinder there on the left. There it is. And that's why I prefer lithium batteries. Film loading. I'm doing this from behind a video camera as ever, so it's a little bit fiddly. As I mentioned before, this rewind crank is a bit awkward at times. So if you were a consumer going, oh dear, look at that light trap, that's perished. If you are a consumer going in to a camera shop at this time, 82, 83, and you've got this wind on lever and a rewind crank and some of the controls are a bit fiddly, you're probably not going to want to go for this product. You're probably going to go for the Canon or the Minolta or whatever, with the automated film transport. And that's a bit of a shame, for a reason we'll get to shortly. Now I prefer, when I load a film, to put the film leader in the take-up spool first, pull that across, drop that in place. Weirdly, the film goes that way, but the wind-on lever is over on this side, so it's a little bit counterintuitive. And you don't have to fire a frame and wind on and fire a frame and wind on, you just wind on until it doesn't wind on anymore. And now you're ready to go, not forgetting to set your ISO 200. There we go, this is a test film so it doesn't really matter. So that's largely the camera in its bare bones. There's not much to write home about. There's no fancy features like multiple exposure or waist level finder or whatever. But there's one feature that people overlook on this camera, and that's the lens. Like a lot of cameras of this genre and of this time, it's a 35mm f2.8. It focuses down to 0.7 of a meter, which isn't too bad. But unlike most cameras of this time, unlike the Canon Sure Shot, the Sure Shot 2, the Sure Shot Supreme, the Minolta AF-S, the Fuji DL200, and a host of others, this has a 5-element lens in 5 groups, rather than the 4-element lenses of all of those other cameras I mentioned. The lens on this really is a little bit better than many of the others. Now, some of the sort of later and what have become legendary and consequently expensive cameras, some of the Yashica T series and the Contax T2 and so forth, they also have 5 lenses, but that's a different, and I should say the Nikon L35AF, which came out in '86, also has 5 elements, but they have 5 elements in 4 groups. This is 5 elements in 5 groups. Is one better than the other? Well, hard to say, but this is one of the best lenses on a 35mm compact camera. I would say the Contax T2 probably is the best of any compact camera, along with perhaps the Leica Mini Lux and the Nikon TI cameras. But for the sort of mass market cameras, not the very expensive ones, this is pretty much as good as it gets. Now, I have made mention to the fact that this is a manual winding camera a number of times now, and Pentax did make a motorized version, which was the PC35AF-M. They also sold this camera in a little kit, which came in a little kit box. Here it is. Very nice and silver and over the top, as the 1980s was. And what you got in here was the camera, which obviously goes in here, and remarkably an external winder. This is a strange thing. I can't remember if this came out as part of the original camera or if Pentax made it as an additional thing later on going to feedback. But the winder has a little cog just in here. I don't know if you can see that. So you can probably guess how this works. It bolts onto the side here, and that little cog literally engages in the thumb wheel. It has its own shutter button, and you can see there's a little steel plate just up here. Literally, as you press the shutter button on the release, it's pushing a steel plate down on the camera. It's a little bit crude, to give it to be fair to it, but it does work. So let's pop some batteries in. This runs on its own batteries, and if the batteries in the winder fail, you can continue to use the camera without the winder, even with the winder attached. So there's a screw thread, and there's a screw here, and a screw thread here. Marry the two up. Just gonna cinch that up. And the winder itself has its own on-off switch. So you turn that on. Now, as it is, I can fire the shutter and wind on manually, although it is a little bit less convenient. But if I close this little hatch, it should. Yeah, those batteries probably aren't the freshest. So there you go, there's a little motor in here, literally driving a cog that turns this wheel, which is a compromised design, is that the correct term? It's not ideal, that's for certain. So nonetheless, that's the bare bones of the camera. The winders are now quite rare. It added quite a chunk of money to the purchase price, so most people that bought these cameras didn't buy them with the winder. So I'm quite fortunate to have this one. The camera itself was available in multiple colours, and I'm trying to remember now. Originally it was black and green, and then if you bought it as a winder in the kit, you could have black, silver or red, and those are also quite rare. It's rare to have the winder, and it's rare to have the less standard colours. In the 1980s, people seemed to be quite conservative, and whenever we said to people, what colour do you want, it was always black. Very little appetite for multicoloured cameras at that time. Now, I have run a roll of film through this, and let's go ahead and take a look at some photographs. Before I do that, I beg your pardon, just for the completeness, let's say, the aperture runs from 2.8 to, I think, f16, and the shutter speed's from an eighth of a second to a curious 430th. An eighth of a second is a little disappointing. It would have been nice had it gone to 1 or 2 seconds, but again, it wasn't intended to be a do-everything camera. It is a point and shoot at the end of the day. It does have a tripod thread, so that with the self-timer means you could access that eighth of a second. It's probably enough if you want to stick it on the windowsill of your hotel room and photograph the cove or the bay outside your hotel, if you're lucky enough to have such a well-situated hotel. Anyway, eighth of a second, 250th, 430th, I beg your pardon. You can use the flash as fill flash, and I did take a couple of pictures doing that, and like a lot of these early automatic cameras, that works quite well. But let's have a look at some photographs. First up, this image here is a very famous building in London, out near Vauxhall Station. Not going to go into any details of who lives there or what it's for, but I'm sure many people will recognise it from the occasional James Bond film. But I picked this picture because it just shows what the camera does. It's a point and press camera. If you're out and about walking and you see something interesting, you can just snap a shot. But in particular, I'd like you to look at the branches, the tree branches on the right hand side, and just look at how sharp they are against that cloudy sky. So it's sharp really from corner to corner. A little bit of vignetting. I'm sure this was quite a wide aperture. It was a rainy old day when I took this. So I think overall, tone, contrast, sharpness, pretty good. And there is some vignetting, but it is, or vignetting if you prefer, it is minimal. Taken from more or less the same spot, looking in the other direction. These are some expensive modern flats, whatever you want to call them, apartments. Just by Vauxhall Station, you've got this Victorian station in the left hand corner, and these ultra modern buildings to the other side. That's the way it's going, I'm afraid. This amused me. There's lots of these public hire schemes, public hire bicycle schemes, and this one sadly appears to have passed away on the double yellow line. This was using focus lock, of course, so I'm focusing primarily on the bike and not the background, although there's so much depth of field, it doesn't matter too much. A little bit of ingression in the top right corner there where I've got the strap or something in the way, although on this particular picture I do think it kind of adds to it. So I like that picture, I like that scene. A little bit of urban London living. And another great thing about these literally point and shoot cameras is you can point and shoot. Coming up the escalator from King's Cross Station, I saw this what appears to be a model of a spacecraft, science fiction type thing, and I just took the Pentax out of my jacket pocket as I'm going up the escalator, snapped a picture. Probably I should have used the exposure compensation button, but nonetheless I'm actually quite pleased with that as a picture. It's quite amusing, as is the next one. Again, parked my car in a multi-storey car park early one morning, and the way the shadow of the concrete car park walls contrasts with the full sunlit buildings opposite. And again, looking at the detail in the brickwork and the awning on the left really shows how crisp and lovely this lens is. More modern architecture, and this is broadly East London. It's Aldgate or thereabouts. Don't know what this development's all about, but again, just some nice, walking around, see something interesting pictures, as is the next one and the one after. Now this one I'm particularly fond of. If you look at the brickwork on the right hand side, you really can see a lot of detail in it, and because it's a repeating pattern. If that was photographed on a digital camera, that would either have an aliasing pattern or it'll be a little bit less sharp because of an anti-aliasing filter. So under some circumstances, film really is better from a resolution, never mind an atmospheric feel. And then the tower block in the middle, you've got the reflections at the bottom, but if you look at the top of the tower, then you can still see detail all the way into the little ventilation slots at the top there. Pretty happy with that as a picture. These were shot incidentally on XP2, which has quite a wide exposure range. And here's another contrast of the old and the new. This building to the left is the Eastern Dispensary, which was built in the 19th century by charitable donation. And believe it or not, although it has various stone carvings and architectural flourishes, let's say, it was built by the architect that gave it the lowest price tend for the build. So if you can get that sort of detail and structure in a building in the 19th century, well, come on, Mr. Foster, you can do better. It was a pub for a while, more recently, and it's now empty. So if you'd like a substantial Victorian building in East London, there's one available apparently. I saw a bunch of clouds, thought they were quite nice, so I took a picture of them. And again, looking at the tree branches on, I believe this is a cypress tree, perfectly sharp, nice control of exposure, really not much else to say, it's just a snapshot. None of these photographs I take to test cameras are going to be especially interesting, I guess, but they just show how the cameras work. This and another one, I wanted to get the film square on to something that was straight line to see if there was very much distortion in the lens in terms of barrel or pincushion distortion. It's a curved window, it curves out, it's a bow window, so that's pretty good. Not much going on there in terms of distortion. And a similar story for number 11. You'll notice firstly that I've chopped the tops of the flags off, and that's because I specifically didn't want to tilt the camera up. Very much wanted to keep the film plane parallel, level to the subject. So the flagpoles and the lamppost in the background, they are straight. They're not in any way curvy or banana shaped, so it shows how well sorted this lens is in terms of barrel and pincushion distortion. There was another little picture I took around here, again just another little snapshot, which at the first glance looks a bit dull, but I rather like the chap on the left who's just, I'm going to park my motorbike here. It's fine. The dog's happy with that. The dog's just having a little rest in the middle of the public square, watching the world go by. And then there's the girl on her scooter thing, just having a nice little afternoon out. Her parents are probably having a cup of tea in the local cafe. Just a nice little domestic, regional sort of a scene, I guess you could say. I also wanted to try out the minimum focus distance, and that's what we have here on number 8. So again, this is both minimum focus distance and using the focus lock. Similarly, it was a sunny day. Tried to take some interesting shadow photographs, but to be honest with you, there just weren't that many interesting shadows around. And just a couple more. Local cafe sign, very sharp, very nice. Not much to add really. Now, I think it was for the Olympics, but a lot of post boxes got painted in a gold colour, of which these two seem to have survived. I sort of forgot that I had a black and white film in the camera when I took this picture. But I just popped the flash unit up to fill in the shadow. These post boxes are under a little bit of a canopy, a little bit in shadow. As you can see, the camera's balanced the flashlight and the ambient light really very well indeed. And there's another example of that with this horse statue. It's called the Black Horse. It's a statue in Milton Keynes, and it's by a bank that has a black horse as its mascot, or whatever you want to call it, logo. A bank, I'm pleased to say, I no longer bank with. So those were just a few photographs from roll of film I put through here just to try it out. And hopefully you can see from that, probably turn that off, just how good this lens is. And what a great little camera. Very, very fond of this. As I say, I've got my own reasons for being fond of it. Should you buy one in this day and age? Well, if you want a film camera and you want sharp photos, couldn't hesitate to recommend it. Just bear in mind that you are going to be limited to 400 ISO film, and yeah, you should be fine. These don't seem to be fetching the outrageous prices that some other cameras from a similar era do. So there are still some bargains to be had, although people do seem to be realising just what it is and how good it is. So prices do seem to be creeping up a little bit, but you can still find one for a fair price. I'm not even going to guess what sort of price they're going for these days, but well worth it. Anyway, that's been the PC35AF. I hope somebody's found this video of use or interest, and thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. Have a good day.